let us all do we can to build a better future.
All right, I want to welcome my friend Caleb Maupin. Caleb and I got to know each other a little while back. Some of the people he works with are fans of the show. And I reached out to Caleb because, sir, you are a center of controversy.
Oh, I am?
Well, let's face it, in this day and age of cancel culture, of people saying, well, you cannot talk to one side or the other.
How dare you disagree with my opinion?
How dare you talk to anybody? So I want to give a little bit of background here. I became aware of Caleb a little bit through somebody, a regular supporter and viewer of our show, the Yankee Tanky, and started checking out Caleb, and I began to realize that this poor man was being pilloried for the cardinal sin of acknowledging that people might disagree with each other on some issues, but also may have some shared goals.
That's insane.
And what I found was that this gentleman, who is against racism, who supports the right to marry who you want, who supports abortion rights, who strongly supports the rights of individuals to live peaceful and prosperous lives, was being smeared as a red-brown, as a Nazbol, as a Nazi, and then the stories even started getting crazier. So Caleb, he is also I want to mention, he's a commentator also on RT, a correspondent there. Sir, welcome, and we're so happy to have you here on Hard Lens.
Sure, glad to be here.
And so, what are people angry with you about now? I recently saw somebody said that you opposed abortion rights, even though you were on record for saying you do support abortion rights, but it's getting to the point of hysteria.
Sure. I mean, I've marched for abortion rights. I've done clinic defense, actually. When I was an activist in Detroit, Michigan in the summer of 2008, I remember we did clinic defense against right-wing folks who were trying to protest abortion clinics. So, I'm on record supporting LGBT rights. I'm on record supporting abortion rights. But it really doesn't matter because the way this kind of cancel culture team works is they find one thing and then they blow it up. And I think what I said, that initial interaction we had, was based on the fact that I had said that even though I do support the right to abortion, even though I do support gay marriage, I'm willing to work with people who disagree with me on that. And that caused a lot of people to lose their minds. Well, guilty as charged. I have been at demonstrations with Roman Catholics that are opposed to the death penalty, Catholic priests and nuns who I can assure you are opposed to abortion and gay marriage, but they're also opposed to the death penalty, as am I, and I'm proud to have marched beside them. I went to a great conference in Iran, along with members of the Nation of Islam, which is one of the most important Black nationalist organizations in the United States. And they are also opposed to abortion and gay marriage. I've spoken at conferences by Shia Muslims talking about, the need, to highlight their narratives and how they've been kind of suppressed in global situations, what's going on in Yemen, what's going on in Syria and other things. I can assure you those Muslims, those Shia Muslims, were against abortion and against gay marriage. But that doesn't mean that just because I disagree with them on that, I can't stand with them. And I think that we kind of forget. I almost use the term sex reductionism. Everything is reduced to cultural issues that, look, at the end of the day, if someone's against abortion, if they really do feel that abortion is murder and taking a life, you're not going to change their mind with an argument. There have been many arguments in my life where I've seen people change their position. Never have I seen someone who is anti-abortion say, you know what, you're right. Actually, it is a woman's right to choose. It's just kind of a cultural issue. It's the kind of thing, if you grew up in a certain household, you grew up in certain regions, if you grew up with certain religious views, you're going to feel this way. And if you grew up in another region or another household or another, faith community or whatever, you're going to see things differently. And that an economic program, that's the kind of thing that brings Americans together. We can all see the country is falling apart. We can all see that our highways and bridges and power plants are in shambles right now, while our government is spending lots of money on wars overseas and doesn't seem to have the interests of the people at heart. And that's one thing that we can see eye to eye on. So why not focus on issues that can bring Americans of different perspectives together? Why focus on these culture wars where no one's mind is really going to change?
One thing that I talk a lot about on this show is natural disasters. And a couple months ago, when there was that horrific tornado that such death and destruction through the middle United States, one thing that I pointed out was that the National Weather Service's chat room which meteorologists, emergency management professionals rely on to keep up to date when these disasters are happening. It's outdated software that's over a decade old, and it kept collapsing during the worst of it, and people were having to move over to Slack to be in touch with each other at this very critical time. And this is, I think, just one example when you have a government that is willing to invest in big and better bombers, but can't update critical communications software for disaster management. That should be something that everybody should be willing to agree on, regardless even of their political views or their views on solid economics. When people can't communicate to manage things in a disaster, that indicates to me a failed state.
Oh, absolutely. And, one thing that I think is an important point is look at the price of food right now. I mean, the price of milk has gone up so much over the past 7 or 8 months. The price of any meat product, the price of eggs, the price of bread. Why doesn't Joe Biden do what Richard Nixon did and impose price controls in order to make sure that working families can afford to buy the food they need to survive? That would just be kind of a basic move. When you have the highest inflation that we've had in decades, why not have the president take an emergency move that he is legally authorized to do and put a 90-day price freeze on food prices? He could do that, but he's not doing that. It's bizarre. He keeps accusing Russia of trying to invade Ukraine, and Russia's coming forward and saying,
we're waiting.
Yet American families at this point are seeing the price of food go up. And, for wealthier folks, they're like, okay, we have to spend more on food. But for, people on fixed incomes and people getting food stamps and food assistance, this is a big deal. This cuts into their spending ability quite a bit. This is an emergency situation. Let's see some price controls.
What I did want to bring up is last week, I think it was, I was bringing up that they were actually seeing inflation in fruits and vegetables, which almost never happens. And then just today, there was a report from January that as far as groceries were concerned, the category with the highest level of inflation, I think it was 1.9%, something like that, is baked goods and cereal. So bread and cereal, we're seeing inflation in bread and cereal at this point.
And I think you also mentioned in a previous story that most of the inflation itself is just, I don't know, let's raise the price. We don't have increased expenses, but let's just raise the price anyway. So I would love to, it'd be nice if Joe Biden came out to the American people and said with that discussion on freezing prices, he said, we're going to do this. You know why we're going to do this? Most of the increase in price has nothing to do with increased costs. It's just corporate greed. But of course, that's not Joe Biden's style. Joe Biden's style is, I love corporate greed. That's what I built my entire brand on. Keep going.
Well, he did say he proudly prostitute himself to corporations. And I think it's also important to point out is that throughout all the 2020 presidential election cycle, we heard from the vote blue no matter who and the sycophants there, and a lot of people who had Trump derangement syndrome and still suffer from it were saying that Biden was going to return things back to normal. But this is the new normal, and that is we have inflation, the kids are still in cages, we're trying to instigate a war with Russia over BS reasons. And at this point, there are still so many people out there, especially on social media, saying we got to vote blue no matter who. We have to support the Democrats. I can't in good conscience support the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. But what is the next step? How do we actually get people to actually break away from this mentality? And I've noted you've been attacked for even talking about, hey, let's break away from the Democratic Party. But as soon as you say these words, we're like, well, okay, what's next? Oh, you're basically going to vote for a Republican then. Or if you vote third party, you're basically voting Republican, which again is not factually true. I'm voting for a third party candidate. But what are your thoughts on this?
I think we need to stop judging politicians by what they say and rather by what they do. And we need to find things that we want them to do, like food price controls, like Medicare for all, like rebuilding the country's infrastructure, like mass employment, like public control of our natural resources. And we need to go to the politicians and say, now, are you for this or are you against it? And hold their feet to the fire. I really liked Jimmy Dore's Force the Vote campaign. I really liked the Medicare for All marches. Make it about the policies, not the people. And that's what needs to be done, right? And that so much of politics is just kind of a beauty contest. Do you like this person better than that person? Does this person seem like somebody you'd want to have a beer with or hang out with on Saturday night or not? And we need to get way past that, because at this point, things are not being done. There seems to be this attitude that the government is best that governs least, right? That if the government just stays out of everything, it'll be okay. That's the philosophy behind neoliberal economics.
Yeah.
But Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he called that do nothing government. And he talked about how the American people were led to the Great Depression because of do nothing government. And I, at the Center for Political Innovation, which is a think tank that I'm working to build, you can check out our website, cpiusa.org. We call for the opposite. We call for a government of action that will swing into action to protect the working families of the United States. We say we need a government of action that will fight for working families. And that is what is dramatically needed here. We need decisive leadership, like what we saw with Abraham Lincoln, like what we saw with Franklin Roosevelt, where people are hungry, people are suffering, and the state takes up its responsibility. We the people, that's the opening of the preamble of the US Constitution. And if you look at, all throughout history, things have started to change when you have leadership that feels it has responsibility. If you're a parent and your child is not being properly fed, and the teachers at school can tell your child is malnourished, you can be arrested. If you're a parent and your child doesn't have proper clothing in the winter, you can be arrested. And it won't be because you did something to your child, rather because you didn't do something. The charge would be criminal neglect. And I think if you look at the United States right now, our government is guilty of criminal neglect of the country. Communities across the United States don't have properly paved roads. Water isn't being properly purified. Our government is guilty of criminal neglect. They are in dereliction of duty. And we need to demand that they step up and do their job and take decisive action to get America going again.
Earlier in this show, I reported on a story that I know is part of your plan and your idea for revitalizing the U.S., and that is this issue of usury, of these high interest rates. And my story was about the National Consumer Law Center, which has really been on top of this issue of so-called rent-a-banks that allows finance companies to partner with new online banks to circumvent state usury laws and interest caps. They have these puppy loans that are being promoted right now, and at pet stores where people are taking out loans to buy a puppy that range from 130 to 190 percent interest rate a year, annual percentage rate. And this is, again, I think one area, as I like to point out, where a whole bunch of people, if they wanted to do so, could come together to work together, because this is something that is, as you point out on your website, all major world religions speak out against this about usury and or very high interest rates, and are very careful about that because they know that it can lead to dire consequences for the poor and even the precariat. So yeah, we were talking about this earlier, and I think that would be another great area where people could come together regardless of politics or religion to work together to stop these practices.
Sure. Well, I've often pointed out that, I'm a guy who likes Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin and Che Guevara and other figures. But if they're too radical for you, you can go read the Bible, or the Quran, or the Torah. All of them forbid the lending of money at interest. And there's a reason that this law existed in these religions. It wasn't simply because, divinity said so. There's a practical reason, which is when you lend money and make money by lending money, no real physical economy is created in the process, right? You are having money and you're getting money back because you had money. And that leads to a situation where you have a creditor class a small group of people that are making money by having money. And pretty soon they have exponentially larger amounts of money and power than everybody else in your society. And you get a situation like we're in now, where local governments, state governments, and the federal government are deeply in debt to bankers. And central bankers and creditors are kind of determining government policy, because, you know, when you go to pay your taxes, that money doesn't go to schools and bridges and highways. That money goes to pay back the loans we've taken out from big banks that are used to pay for schools and bridges and highways. And that gives these big banks the ability to have all kinds of power and dictate policy. You know, and I mean, look, I mean, you can read the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States says that only the federal government has the right to print money, but yet we've privatized that. We've handed that over to a private corporation called the Federal Reserve Bank. And for every dollar we print, we get more into debt as a society. We are being ripped off. I mean, the country is being ripped off. And that if you look at the founding of the United States, you know, you look at the writings of Alexander Hamilton or economists like Henry Carey or Henry Clay, there was an understanding that the American Revolution was carried out to keep this kind of thing from happening. The idea was that we were going to have a national bank where the purse strings would be controlled by the public in order to regulate the economy and make sure that we continued to grow and didn't have this kind of problem. And throughout the history of the United States, you can see kind of a struggle between the American economic system and the free trade Adam Smith British economic system. And many people have pointed that out. And that a lot of the economics you see coming out of China, heavily influenced by Marxism and socialism, but also you can see some similarities to what Alexander Hamilton and Henry Clay and others advocated. Which is this notion that the economy should be regulated and controlled in order to serve the population overall.
And it doesn't. And you know, I think we've become a nation of people who are kept struggling on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
You know,
And
for
divided.
Struggling and divided. And I think that's another thing with lending money at interest. You know, not only, as you point out, you create a creditor class that is doing nothing more than moving money around rather than actually producing something or providing a legitimate service. But it also creates a situation in which one group of people ends up being beholden to another. And I think that can break down communities and relationships between each other. Now, banking has become so anonymous in this country, we may not even think about it or see it, but at some point in the past, people who forbade usury must have seen that very real problem of what happens to communities when some are beholden to the other.
Sure. Well, look at the student debt ripoff, for example. Many people of my generation and younger are just trapped in student debt situations. How do you think this is going to look 10 or 20 years down the road when, I mean, these people, are they going to be able to buy homes with that much student debt? I mean, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And it kind of reflects, the debate around this just reflects that we've been trained to think about these things in the improper way. The idea is, well, we can't give people free college or free education. We can't do that because that's a handout. You got to earn these things, right? Well, that's not the way a society should see education. When we provide people with education, it's not that we're giving them a gift. It's not like we're, giving them a birthday present or something. The idea is that is an investment in the future. We need engineers to have a healthy society. We need scientists. We need doctors. We need educated people to make a better country. And it's in the interest of the country overall to invest in the population, make sure they're educated so you have a stronger country. But we don't have that right now. Apple, during the Trump campaign in 2016, Donald Trump said he was going to force Apple to make their iPhones in the United States. Well, of course, he didn't do that. And Apple came forward and said they couldn't do that. We don't have enough engineers here. We don't have enough technicians. We don't have enough people here that would be educated enough to do that. And we have this relationship with the rest of the world that is not good. If you go to the doctor now, often you're going to have a doctor from India. You're going to have a doctor from Russia. You're going to have a doctor from China, from Vietnam, from Africa. And there's a reason. This is called brain drain. And this was a policy developed during the Cold War. And the idea was to weaken specifically the communist countries like the Soviet Union, like China, but also to weaken other developing countries. We would start drawing in our engineers and our scientists and our doctors and others from these countries. And these countries would not have the folks that they needed, and that would weaken them and weaken their economies. And then we here in the United States didn't continue investing in our own population and making sure that our own population was educated. So the developing countries lost out, and the US population that was here lost out. And it's a lose-lose situation that served a geopolitical end during the Cold War. It was about, weakening the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union and countries like Cuba, they spend a lot of money investing and giving people education. And those people get that education, and then they jump over the Berlin Wall, or they get on a boat, and go to Miami. And then those countries don't have the doctors and professionals that they need, whereas we're not training the folks here. It's a bad policy rooted in kind of geopolitical ends for these big banks and corporations. They want to dominate the globe. They want to beat down independent countries. Doesn't help us here in the United States. It doesn't help countries around the world. Bad policy overall. We need to invest in our population, and we need to take education seriously.
There's also another thing, too, that's been happening, and that is recently the Great Resign or resignation, where you have workers now who are refusing to return back to the game. And that is, you have retail workers quitting their jobs. You have everyone quitting, from blue-collar workers, white-collar workers, quitting their job because they're realizing that after the 2020 pandemic, what's the whole point of sticking your neck out for a system that never even cared about you in the first place? So that's another thing. Like the previous administrations, and even this one now, is trying to continue on with the neoliberal economic system that we're still in. But yet you have people now saying, no, I won't participate in it. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it will not be what I did before the pandemic.
And this is such a tragedy, because if you go all over the world, the Americans, the people in the United States, were known for this hard work, go get 'em spirit, right? Go out, work hard, achieve your dreams. We're known for that around the world, but a lot of Americans are waking up and realizing, there's really no hope for getting ahead, right? I mean, this American dream is a lie, and I've run up debt, and I've got college debt, and I'm barely paying my bills, and this pandemic happened and ruined the economy. Why should I go out and return and can just get back on this hamster wheel that's not taking me anywhere? A lot of people are feeling that way. One of my favorite writers is Anna Louise Strong, who was an American journalist. She moved to the Soviet Union during the 1930s. She was from Seattle, had been a leader of anti-war and labor struggles in the United States. And in her book, I Change Worlds, she writes about how that motor-mindedness, that hardworking spirit that is associated with Americans, she saw it in the Soviet Union in the 1930s when Stalin was mobilizing the population to go out and build power plants and wipe out illiteracy and electrify the country and make the Soviet Union into an industrial superpower that ultimately was able to defeat the Nazis. When he did that, that was kind of unleashing that hard work spirit that people associate with America. But there was a difference, because that spirit in America, they talk about go west, young man, and all of that. It's associated with settler colonialism. It's associated with taking land from Native Americans. And it's also associated with radical individualism. If somebody else is struggling, well, it's their fault. Don't think about them, right? You're on your own. A man's house is his castle, etc. Well, if you really want to get ahead, human beings as a group have always gotten ahead by working together, by seeing their common interest and pulling together, whether it's from the time we were hunter-gatherers in the woods to the time where we built the pyramids and some of the amazing things throughout the ancient world up until today, right? Every product in every store is the result of collective human labor. Go and buy a pen at a store and think about, there's probably thousands of people who contributed to making that one individual product. No one at this time can look at anything and say, I made that. This is my personal creation. The human beings are coming together to create amazing things. However, we still have an economy that is centered around making profits for a small group of owners. So all of that collective human labor is being pumped into the individual advancement of private owners. And it's leading to a deeply irrational situation, whether that's climate change, whether it's the danger of war, whether it's the fact that as abundance grows and we have, the ability to produce goods better than we ever have, we have more and more people left outcast and starving and hungry. This is the irrationality of profits in command. And it shows that we need to move toward a society where profits and greed don't dominate the economy, but rather human rational planning and reason is given the ability to take the lead.
I think we might have, let us know if we have some questions that we got in Super Chats that we should read, if that's the case.
Sure. We got actually a question from Roger Meadows, who tipped $2. Caleb, baby, what's up? Use co-op ride, especially for reservations for long rides. Shout out to Roger
Yeah,
Meadows
I
because he
remember-
told us how he gave you a ride.
Yeah,
There you go.
I got photographs. I actually pinged him on Twitter. He said, well, I said, did you guys get to hang out? He said, well, no, but he said nice things about Heartland. So that was cool. We are going to have to wind this up because we're coming to the end of the show, but I have to ask you because you're right. You're with RT. We touched on it earlier. I am getting really annoyed with this whole saber rattling thing with Ukraine.
Yeah.
If you could give us in just a minute nutshell what your take is on it, I'd love to hear it, Caleb.
I mean, Russia has no desire to invade Ukraine. At this point, the troops have been moving away from the border, and U.S. leaders will not let this go. And they gave a deadline. It was going to happen, 2 nights ago. It was supposed to happen, right? Wednesday night, it was going to happen.
Yeah.
But the
I've
time,
been waiting.
Well, wait.
British time didn't happen, right? But I think what's really going on here, I'll just give you my personal opinion. Look at the price of natural gas right now. It's a cold winter in Europe, an exceptionally cold winter. That price of natural gas is very high, and natural gas companies are making a fortune. They are gouging, just like these other companies we're talking about with the inflation. And what would change that? If natural gas started going across that Nord Stream 2 pipeline that's been built to Germany, if European countries started purchasing Russian natural gas, there'd be more natural gas on the market and the price of natural gas would go down, and BP and Chevron and ExxonMobil would stop this gouging party where they're making lots of money. That it's necessary from the standpoint of maintaining a monopoly and making sure that Europe keeps buying its natural gas from British and American companies. It's necessary to have tension with Russia to keep their natural gas off the market. That's what I think is going on here. And that's why they won't let this go. Russia's not going to invade Ukraine. Russia's been moving their troops away from the border, and they just won't let this go. I mean, this morning at the UN Security Council, Antony Blinken was he sounded like Alex Jones. He was talking about false flags, and there's going to be a false flag chemical attack. Oh, Russia's going to do it, and they're going to trick the world. They're going to have hired actors who are going to pretend to get disease. This is silliness. This is just utter silliness. Russia doesn't want a war. They would like the USA to kind of roll back its military involvement in Eastern Europe and not be threatening them on their border, but they're not going to invade Ukraine. That's not going to happen.
Well, you're talking about the price of natural gas. Now I'm thinking about what the price of aluminum foil is at this point, because we're all going to have to start putting that on. Caleb, we do have to conclude the show, but I want to thank you, first of all, for coming on the show and doing our sound check and all that. I really appreciate I know you're a very busy man, so I appreciate you doing that for us. Hope to see you again on the show sometime soon and connect with you. I'll be seeing you on Twitter. Where can people find you?
Sure. Well, my website is calebmaupin.com, CALEBMAUPIN. You can also check me out on Twitter, on YouTube, and on Rockfin. I'm always streaming. It's like I compulsively stream. If I go 1 or 2 days without
I've noticed that, yes.
Yeah, I get nervous. So I got to get on social media. So if you want to watch me stream and engage with me, we answer questions. We go all night sometimes. So it's a lot of fun. So there you go.
It's great.
And if you're ever here in the Chicagoland area, we'd be more than happy to have you here at the 99 Perspective Studio.
I'll take you up for some
Maybe
Chicago food.
taking you up on that this spring. There's a very good chance I will be in Chicago pretty soon.
Hope to see you when you're here. We'll wine, pizza, hams.
Hams, there you go. Why not?
We have a lot of good food here.
All right.
We're number one.
Number one.
Tell everyone. Convo Couch, Chicago Pizza's got the best.
All right.
Yeah.